Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. Take a trip into the macabre world of goth modeling in the new millennium in this spooktacular Spinsterella story. Pick up your copy of Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. I was on Facebook on Saturday when somebody posted a link to a video talking about how living together would be a great new option to avoid dealing with marriage. And as I looked at that link to that video, I did leave a comment on that link to that video. And I also went out and looked at it and shook my head because, as a member of Generation X, I can tell you that the whole idea of living together is a horrible idea and does not benefit either the man or the woman based on the chaos I saw firsthand growing up here in the South Bronx, as many of my classmates basically were either conceived from these type of living situations or conceived completely out of wedlock. And the whole idea of bringing back the living together concept to me really is one that has me shaking my head because it seems like people really haven't learned about the dysfunction and chaos that came from all of these men and women over the 1960s and onward, going out here and looking to, as they call, shack up in a rickety situation that basically doesn't benefit either man or woman in any way, shape, or form. Now, the whole concept of living together was basically designed to be a workaround around the institution of marriage that God had established. Now, the Most High God, when He created marriage, basically created marriage so that a man and woman could come together under Him and become one flesh, forsaking both their mother and their father, and then being covered under His protection. Unfortunately, many men and women, basically brainwashed by Madison Avenue and Hollywood and the white feminist movement that was funded by the wealthy, wanted to go out here and wanted to work around that whole institution of marriage that God had established, and they wanted to work around that institution because neither the man or the woman wanted to be accountable to God, one, and two, did not want to take responsibility for their roles inside of God's order. Now, I go in depth on this in two of my books, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single and The Woman Crisis, and the whole concept of living together is not an optimal one. No, it's not an optimal one. However, many men and women got caught up in the whole idea of living together because in the 1960s and when the feminist movement was rising, many women wanted to forsake marriage, and many men who wanted to go out here and get involved with these women. A lot of those women, basically because they were so-called exercising their power, basically didn't understand the social hierarchies that were put in place by their fathers to protect them. Now, when it came down to the pre-feminist era, marriage wasn't the only institution that a man could gain access to a woman. Moreover, it was the only institution a man could gain sexual access to a woman's body. Usually, when it came down to daughters, daughters were under the strict authority of their fathers if that father was in the home. And if a man wanted to even get involved with one of his daughters, he had to go directly to that father and had to sit down with that father and be vetted by that father over a course of a dinner and meet directly with that father and talk directly to him to get his blessing in order to be able to go and court that woman. And the courtship was only about, again, finding out if both were compatible for marriage. That is how the whole institution of relationships worked until about the 1940s, when corporate America started introducing the concept of dating, because dating was not a thing before the 1940s. No, dating was something made up by corporate America, Madison Avenue, and Hollywood to take advantage of their repackaging of youths and turning them into teenagers. And what they wanted to do was be able to make money on teenagers on the institution of dating. However, when it came down to dating, it still was under the authority of the father, and a daughter still had to go and bring the boy or the young man to the father. And in order for a girl to get involved with that boy or that man, they had to be vetted by the father, and they had to be vetted by the father in order to get involved with each other. And the ultimate goal for the girl to be married to this guy, and that's the only reason why they allowed them to get involved with each other. Now, again, before the whole dating situation, a man had to be established. He had to have his job. He had to have his own residence. He had to have a way to care for that woman in order for him to even be considered to get involved with a daughter. And even in the world of dating, it was still a boy had to be a teenager who was working some sort of job after school and making some sort of money and be on a track for something like college or trade school. He had to have had a road to be established in order for a father to sign off on him getting involved with her daughter. So there were standards in place for a man if he wanted to get involved with a woman or a girl, and those standards were established again by fathers to protect their daughters so that they would not be taken advantage of by cads, womanizers, and other men at the bottom of society. That's what the fathers in communities did. They wanted to protect their daughters because it was a shame for a father for his daughter to be running these streets just getting with any guy. And it was even a shame if that daughter came back pregnant, because that was a bad look for a father. It showed to the world that he was not a man who was in control of his household and wasn't a responsible steward under God. And it was an embarrassment to that father because it made him lose face in the community, because it said that he did not have good control over his daughters and did not have good control over his home. So back then, this was the standard that was established as related to things, and that's what the whole institution was all about, because it was keeping within God's word, because Jesus said, for a man and a woman forsake their mother and father to cleave to each other. And usually if the mother and father, again, if the parents agreed on the marriage, again, they would leave and form their own home, with the daughter being given by the father to her husband, and the husband would be the head over that woman. That was the standard that was established as related to maintaining God's order, maintaining the standard that God established for marriage, in that, again, the man and the woman only left their parents' home only when they got married, and that's when they became their own home, and that's when they became their own family, because that would be the daughter taking on the husband over her husband's name and being submitted to her husband. But what happened in the late 1960s is we got a generation of rebellious individuals, a part of the silent generation and part of the baby boomers, who basically did not want to follow the standards established by God in the Bible. No, what these people wanted to do is they knew what they were going to do was wrong, but what they wanted to do was willfully create what they believed to be a workaround that would be better than God's order. They believed that they could go out here and create this workaround that would benefit both of them without them being hindered by what they consider the rigid rules of the Word of God. And that's where we got the whole concept of living together. Now, the whole concept of living together came out of the whole free love and sexual revolution of the 1960s and the 1970s, and also was made up by the part of the white feminist movement, and basically enabled by those who were part of the wealthy, because the wealthy, for years before the feminist movement, what they wanted to do was break up the American family, because they felt that the father basically was hindering their ability to make profits as related to their businesses. And what they wanted to do was find a way to get that father out of the way, because that father basically was the one who controlled the finances of the home. He was also the one who controlled access to the daughters, And he knew that the daughter basically was an emotional person and the mother was an emotional person, and they would go out here and buy items on impulse, and that would allow their business to profit. But the whole thing is that without the father there to maintain the finances, there was no structure in place to be able to maintain a home. But they didn't want that father there, because what they wanted to do was be able to profit from getting the woman into debt. So they made a plan to look to get the father out of the home and look to get responsible men out of society as being seen as the ideal. And what they wanted to do was, after they got the father out of the home, basically again have the woman out here on her own, and then have her working, and then have the television raising the kids. But as that was going on, since there was nobody there to vet the guys, what happened is the women, based on their emotions, started getting involved with all sorts of men at the bottom of society: the cads, the womanizers, the players, the dusty dudes, the functionally illiterate. These guys basically were able to gain access to women because the father was taken out of his place in society. And with the father being taken out of his place in society, there was nobody there to keep the gate and be the buffer that would go out here and vet men and look to again see and test these men as related to their values and character. And there was no man there to basically look at and establish a standard for what type of man his daughter would get involved with, because with the father at the door, basically the guys who were the cads, the womanizers, the players, the ladies' men, the hustlers, the functionally illiterate, the men who could not build or establish a home, these men were not allowed to even gain access to the daughters, and basically were put in the margins of society. And what happened is, after the father was removed from the home, this is where we had radical women like feminists talking about how they wanted to go out here and be able to control their own destiny and pick their own man. And sadly, a lot of these women, because they didn't appreciate or never experienced a father vetting men, they wanted to go out here and look to pick their own guys, not understanding the guys that they were so used to associating with were at the bottom of society, and not established men who had their own job, had their own place, were making their own money, and able to take care of a woman. Those guys basically, they were not the ones they were used to, because they would have to submit to those men. No, they wanted guys who they thought they could gain more control over, and that's why they wound up picking these guys at the bottom. And as they wanted to gain power and control inside of that relationship, they did not want to submit to a man in a marriage, and the men themselves did not want to be in a marriage, because they did not want to take the leadership role or take the responsibility that God established for them over the home. No, these men, basically what they wanted to do was, again, be able to have this workaround for marriage, because marriage meant accountability to God, and marriage meant accountability also to the state, because you had to go to the state to be married. And these men wanted to create a workaround where they could continue to maintain their freedom from looking to commit to a woman, and not look to commit to that woman, because what they wanted to do was, if things didn't work out, have the option to press the eject button and basically get out of that relationship. That's what these guys wanted to do, and that's where we got the whole concept of living together. The whole concept of living together, again, was designed to be a workaround the institution of marriage that God established. The whole idea of living together was a man and a woman would come together inside of an apartment and basically stay with each other, and stay with each other as related to, again, having a relationship. Now, many of these guys who were the whole concept of living together, again, many of these men were basically cowards who did not want to commit to a woman in most cases. No, what they wanted to do was be able to get with that woman and be able to get sexual access up to that woman's body. And that's what many of the cads and womanizers wanted. And then there were guys who were basically broke and not established. They basically got a girlfriend and basically got with her and hoped to eventually raise enough money to be married. And they would go and live with this woman. And then there were some guys out here who basically they just wanted to go out here and they were really confused. They didn't know who they really were, and they had a girlfriend, and then they really didn't know where they wanted to go as relationships. But all of these people, as they came together in these living together situations, wound up with their whole quality of life going into a major state of decline. And it went into a major state of decline because many of these young people basically didn't have their heads on straight as related to having their stuff together. Many of these men basically were not in a place where they were basically ready to take on man responsibilities. No, they weren't in a place where they were ready to be a head or a steward, where they had their finances in order, where they had their routine in order, where they had their structure established. And that made it where these men were not really effective leaders in the relationship. And as they were not effective leaders in the relationship, what happened with many of these men is that they started having issues with their women, and the women themselves started having issues because they were not trained in their role as helpmeet to be able to help meet the needs of this man. And they weren't able to help them meet the needs of this man, basically because he did not have a direction for where he wanted to go, because a lot of these guys basically, again, they were young and inexperienced. Some of them basically, again, had no father themselves. Others were basically out here being players and womanizers. Others basically didn't understand how things work. And these relationships were destined to fall completely apart because these two people were living together. And as they were living together, they had no real understanding of how to work within a relationship in the world. And again, everything would fall completely apart. And usually what would happen in these whole living together situations is that they would become a complete disaster over the course of time. Now, usually over the course of time, it would be anywhere from 3 to 5 years where we would start to see this living together situation fall completely apart. And it would fall apart because what would happen is that, again, the man would not be good with finances. The man would not be good at setting a direction. He would be in and out of jobs. He would have no real plans for anything. And with the woman, she would be out here sometimes working, and sometimes she would think that her needs weren't getting met because she didn't have that commitment from that man in a marriage. And since she didn't have that emotional commitment and that emotional security, what would happen to that woman is as she would become insecure, she would go out here and look to do things like go out here and get pregnant by this guy. Or if she was feeling needy, what she would start to do is start to act on her hypergamy and look to try to monkey branch to another man. And that would create situations that were not optimal for either partner. So in both cases, both the man and the woman would not be in a good place as related to things. And as their relationship continued to go, it would eventually start to deteriorate. And as it would start to deteriorate, what would happen is you would have this tangled mess as related to things, as related to them living together. You would have this completely tangled mess, and this tangled mess could go on as related to this whole situation, because some of these situations, some of them went from 3 to 5 years, others went from 10 to 15 years, some of them even went 20 to 25 years, and some of them even had where this man and woman wound up having children together. And this whole thing of living together became a completely tangled mess that the courts had to try to unravel. And when they tried to unravel it, it just became a complete disaster all around. Now, the whole living together situation, again, you have a man and a woman living together, and because they're not married, what happens is that you have people living in an apartment or a home, and there's whose name is on the lease is one thing. That's one thing that's related to things, and whose name is on the deed of the mortgage. This becomes a bit of a problem as related to things because according to some states, there's something called common law marriage where two people live together. And again, according to common law, the woman is entitled to things. However, in some states where there is no common law, basically the man or the woman can just basically pack up and walk away. And that's not a good situation for either the man or the woman. Now, that whole situation, again, you don't have any sort of legal recourse as related to things, as related to stuff, if there is no common law. And that leads to a situation where both partners are buying things as related to building the relationship, and there's no way to really divide that property because nobody really knows who bought what or receipts for who bought what. And in the case of children, basically you have a family where the kids really don't have a legal establishment for who their father is, and you don't have any sort of provisions providing for those children when they become older as related to inheritance. No, all of those things are a part of a marriage because when a man marries a woman, that woman becomes his wife, and as that woman becomes his wife, what happens is all the assets that he has basically are considered to be joint property, and as they are considered to be joint property, basically if something happens to the father, the woman will get all of the assets, and if something happens to the mother, the man gets all the assets. And again, all of this is distributed again according to the probate courts and all of the institutions as related to inheritance, and the children know directly, since they know who their father is, basically can receive inheritances as related to their parents in these cases of this type of situation. Moreover, there is a legitimate line that says, okay, this is the son or the daughter of this man and this woman. So the institution of marriage is there to protect those assets as related to things. However, many of those people who grew up in the era of living together, what they wanted to do was, again, avoid the institution of marriage and all of the protections and provisions God established for marriage. No, what they wanted to do was think that they could do this workaround and basically have something better than marriage, but the whole situation becomes extremely complicated as related to this whole situation of living together. Now, this whole situation of living together is what I call putting pussy on layaway, because basically what this guy is doing is basically looking to go out here and put sexual access on layaway, where he gets the down payment down and then hopes to eventually get enough money to get to the point where he can, again, think he can commit to the woman. But what happens to these guys is that as they put the box on layaway, what happens is that they start, again, having a roving eye. And again, the living together option gives them the opportunity to look to leave, and look to leave because they see somebody looking better. And again, after 3 to 5 years, basically he's looking at this woman, in some cases if he's had children with this woman, and seeing her as less attractive, and looking to try to bail out of the relationship, because he has no, again, marital commitment to that woman. That's why I say it's a coward's option. Same thing with the woman. She's basically, again, after 3 to 5 years, looking at this dude and seeing him basically go nowhere, look to hit the eject button as related to this relationship, and look to monkey branch to a more established man through hypergamy. And the whole situation is that both of these people basically waste all of their time with each other, when they could have just stayed single and possibly went out here and got with a quality man or woman in both cases. That's what they could have done, but these people decided to live together. And what was really sad was during the 1970s and 1980s was a lot of kids had to deal with the aftermath of these living together situations, where most of these men and women basically saw their relationships falling completely apart. And as we had to deal with it, basically had to deal with things like family court, had to deal with issues as related to a single mother drama, had to deal with guys who basically wound up becoming deadbeat dads and bailing out of the relationship because they were not ready to even be in a relationship in the first place, and had to deal with, again, more of these guys, again, looking to put some box on layaway, again, looking to make these installments until they realized that the next new thing was coming out, and then they wanted to bail on the woman they had invested all this money and time in. And many of those women, depending on how much time they stayed together, basically threw away their prime years dealing with this dude who was basically talking about, hey, I want to live together. Again, the reason why they called it shacking up in the 60s is because this guy was basically creating a shack situation, crude, and again, not really of quality as related to a life. He wasn't looking to go out here and try to give a woman the abundant life that Christ wants to give us. He wasn't looking to establish himself. No, he was looking to go out here and look to throw together some little raggedy shack in the hopes that he would be able to get this woman to drop the skid mark fruit of the loom draws and hope to get a taste of the atomic waste from the special place, and hope that he could be able to again continue paying in installments for those draws. But what would happen is that his account would become overdrawn. It would become eventually overdrawn because the woman he was with basically wouldn't get him social currency with the man that he wanted, and he saw a younger, hotter female that he wanted to get with. And in the case of the females, again, they would wind up with their social marketplace value dropping because they were living with this dude and they were hoping they would possibly get to the chance of being a wife, the esteemed title that God established for women, but would never get access to that title because this guy basically, as long as he had that option to leave, he would basically continue looking at the door, seeing all the fine women we could possibly get with, and both partners again would basically wind up in a dissatisfying relationship. And what's really sad is that in some of these extended relationships was that peoples would wind up having kids. They would wind up having kids with this dude, and they would not really be able to have that relationship that was healthy for their children. And that's why the whole living together situation fell out of vogue in the 80s and the 90s, because the whole living together situation basically wound up creating a lot of the illegitimate children from the 70s to the 90s. A lot of those kids came out of these living together situations, and those living together situations became so complicated because both partners were buying things for a home, and again, since there was no marriage, you had these huge disputes in the family courts, and you had situations in small claims court. This is why judges like Judge Judith Scheindlin and Marilyn Milian say that in their shows The People's Court and Judge Judy, the worst thing you could be in is a living together situation, because you got to try to untangle this mess. And again, untangle a mess that's going to be a nightmare to deal with, because you got the woman putting things into the home, you got the man putting things into the home, you have only maybe one name on the lease or maybe one name on the deed. So one partner is basically going to be out on the street and the other partner is just going to be struggling. And the whole thing is nobody has any sort of equity in the relationship the way they do in a marriage, because in a marriage, yes, you may go to divorce court and get taken to the cleaners if you're a dude, but in some cases, if you're not making as much money, you won't get taken to the cleaners, because in these cases, what happens is that they do divide the home and all the assets in the home, so everything as related to the home gets sold and both partners get equal equity out of everything. But in a living together situation, basically there is no equity, and since there's no equity as related to the business of the marriage, what happens is that one partner is gonna be broke and butt out, the other one is gonna take all their stuff and basically again have everything, because again everything is in the name of one person. And in some cases, if you have two names on a lease, it can be a nightmare, because you got two people on a lease and both of them will play this cat and mouse game because they're both stuck in this apartment. And again, it's a nightmare that gets even worse the longer you're in it, because if you're in it for long and you're out here, you're having kids, you're in this place and you're living together for an extended period of time, it's a major nightmare to deal with untangling all of that mess. And you basically have to start over, completely over. I mean, the divorce guy basically has some assets he can start over with, but in the case of the living together situation, neither partner is basically having those type of assets. They've got to start completely over. And it's even worse because when it comes down to the social marketplace, they have to start completely over. I mean, you have to start completely over from zero at the beginning, because you basically, again, invested so much time in someone. You invested so much time in someone, and basically you now have to go out here and start once again. And you're starting out with absolutely nothing, the same way you did when you were a teenager. I mean, this basically impacts a lot of men and women. I mean, depending on the situation, because that's what happens to a lot of the pookies out here. A lot of the pookies go out here and get into living together situations with women. The woman got the property in her name. She got the lease in her name. Most of the assets belong to her. And all he's doing is sitting up in the house. And again, she can just go out here and close up shop, and you're out in the street and you've got nothing at all. And that's what happened to a lot of women in the 80s. On the flip side of that, they would get with a dude, look to live with that dude, create a covert contract thinking he was going to marry them. And then what would happen is he would start to see some fine woman who was much younger, about 3 to 5 years into the relationship, or even 2 years into the relationship, and start to think about, hey, he want to get with her instead, and start kicking some game to her, and then thinking, hey, I'll get with that one instead because she's young and fine. And you've gone out here, you've invested time living with this man, you've taken care of this man, and in some cases even had a child with this man, and he's deciding he's going to look to get out of the relationship. And since there's no marriage, there is no recourse for you outside of child support court, and there's nobody to take care of you, and you're just another single mom stuck on welfare or Section 8. Again, in both cases, it's a major disaster, because sometimes the women do the same thing. The guy's on a job, he's not getting promoted, or he's not really making the money like she thinks he should make, and she decides to see, oh, I see this other dude at this other company, at this company mixer or something out here, and he's making bigger money, and she decides to leave the relationship, and you're basically again stuck with all the bills as you've invested in this woman. And it's worse than divorce, because again, in a divorce you still have some sort of legal recourse, and again, things have to be divided by the courts in an equitable fashion to both partners that's equal. But as related to things with a living together situation, again, it's not one where you're going to live well for long as related to the quality of your life. And that's what I saw going on as related to things in the 80s and the 90s. And again, that's why I called it putting pussy on layaway, like I did in my book Spinsterella Goth Girl Summer. I mean, Matilda calls it putting pussy on layaway, because what it is that you got a guy who, again, he's not in a place where he can lead. He's not in a place where he's established. He's out here looking to go out here and get with this woman, but he doesn't want to put the investment in the woman to make a commitment to her. No, he don't want to put the money in that woman, or the time, or the investment, because he's not ready to be a man. And the same thing with women. You're not ready to be a woman, because if you're a woman and you allow a guy to go out there and put you on layaway, he's not showing that he's in a place where he can lead you, and you're following him into a disaster, all around, because again, this guy is looking to have a relationship on layaway instead of focusing on himself, because a man's first thing is that he needs to focus on getting himself established, getting his own money together, getting his routine together, getting his structure in place. That's what a man has to focus on as related to his youth, is focus on getting himself established. And after he gets himself established, that's when he can go out here and be in a place where he's ready for a relationship. He can be in a place where he's ready for a relationship, and because he's in a place where he can lead that relationship and have a direction and a tone for that relationship, so that woman knows that she can be secure inside of that structured relationship. That's what women want from a man. But many men and women basically were given a bad whole program as related to life with this whole living together finesse. Again, living together is not an optimal situation for a man or a woman. No, living together is not an optimal situation because one, you're living in sin, you're living outside of God's order. That's the first thing that you're doing is you're living in sin. You're not going out here and actively and willfully and intentionally following God. No, you're willfully and intentionally going outside of God's order. And as you willfully and intentionally go outside of God's order, what you do is put yourself in a path of chaos. You put yourself into a path of chaos where what happens to you is that you're going to wind up having to reap what you sow, greater than what you sow, later than what you sow. And that's what happened to many of the silent generation and the baby boomers. They wound up reaping what they sowed, greater than what they sowed, later than what they sowed, as they tried to untangle the mess of their lives. And as they tried to untangle the mess of their lives, what happened with many of those women is that they wound up having illegitimate children. Moreover, even worse, they had the spirit and DNA of another man imprinted on them. And this is what put them on a road where they wound up, again, having multiple baby daddies instead of a husband. They went out here, again, dealing with these cads, dealing with these womanizers, dealing with these guys at the bottom of the social marketplace, and basically wound up with their whole social marketplace value depreciating to a low level because they wound up dealing with these guys. Again, they could have been esteemed wives in God's order, but instead of being esteemed wives, what happened is they wound up following the feminists and all the other radicals who told them, oh, you can do better than marriage. Marriage is an old institution. But what they didn't understand is that when it came down to that institution established by God, that institution was perfect. And the whole thing is that you can't circumvent God. No, God will not be mocked. As a man sows, so shall he reap. And that's what many of those people in the living together situation found out. They tried to go out here and circumvent the word of God. They tried to go out here and pull a workaround around the word of God, but you cannot work around God. No, you can't work around God and his word because his word is true. His word is perfect, and he established this whole institution of marriage. He established this institution of marriage on earth because he wanted to protect his children. He wanted to protect his children. He wanted them to be responsible stewards, and he wanted to protect them on earth and make sure that their bloodlines would continue on with a legitimate lineage. This is what God established for people. Unfortunately, many people got caught up in the devil's ideas that were established by Madison Avenue, Hollywood, and the wealthy, thought they could do better than God, and thought they could do better than God, who created marriage to be until death do we part, and again, created that institution for here on earth because in heaven, again, they do not marry or give in marriage because we are all God's children, and as he is the Father over us, we are like the angels. But the whole thing is people don't understand that here on earth. No, what they want to do is go out here and again live on earth and live outside of his order, live outside of his order as related to the standards of life. And instead of them living an abundant life, what they do is wind up miserable here on earth. They wind up miserable here on earth because they want to live together. Again, live together in sin and then live miserably because when it comes down to living together, again, living together is not an optimal situation. No, it's not optimal because, again, living together with someone means they don't want to commit to you and they're scared to do it. Again, you want to be with a man who has faith in God to follow his standards, faith in God to commit to his standard, faith in God to commit to serving him, because if that man serves God, he will be looking out for his family as related to God's standard. That's what you want in a man, and what a woman wants in a man should be that standard. And when it comes down to a man, he wants a woman who will be a helpmeet, who will look to help, who will commit to helping to meet his needs inside of a marriage. That's what you should want as related to a relationship, because when it comes down to relationships, you should want the God standard, because the God standard is perfect and it doesn't have all the flaws of this workaround that was called living together, a man-made standard. a man-made standard that really doesn't benefit men or women whatsoever, doesn't benefit a man or a woman whatsoever, because when it comes down to that whole standard of living together, again, it's basically, again, a standard established in sin, established in fear, because the whole living together thing is basically based in fear. It's based in the fear that this man won't be able to commit to you, or this woman won't be able to commit to you, and you're doubting from the beginning. You're basically, since you're doubting from the beginning, you're really not committed to each other. And that's why when temptations come along, what happens to folks is that they're basically looking to leave each other, looking to leave each other, looking to head for the exits, looking to head for that exit, because you're looking to live with this person as long as times are good. And since there is no vow made to God of better or worse, or richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, you'll have people bolting for the door, because they only want to be there for you in the good times and not the bad times. That's what being in a relationship, in a living together situation is. Again, it's a sad, tragic mess. And what's even sadder is the kids that get caught up in the middle of this. They have no real security, because their whole foundation is based in the insecurity, because there's, again, no father there who's saying, look, I'm going to take care of you, or of the son and the daughter. Again, it's a bad situation to be in, a real bad situation to be in all around. And many guys, again, they get in this situation, they believe that this is going to be the thing, again, because they want to, again, get easy sexual access to that woman. They want to be able to get her to drop the skid mark Fruit of the Loom draws back in the 70s. And in the 80s, the skid mark Fredericks of Hollywood draws. And basically, they wanted, because they wanted easy sexual access. They didn't want to provide or protect the woman. And that's what led to a generation of women becoming extremely insecure, talking about how they can't find a man, how there are no good men out here, when in actuality, they were making choices to get with this guy without any sort of father in the home to vet this man. Because when there is a father in the home to vet men, when there is a father in the home to, again, look at these men, these guys, the guys who are at the bottom, again, the cads, the womanizers, the pookies, the ray-rays, they basically can't even come to the door, because they know somebody's there. But without that protection of that man that was given to women by God, their father there, from the Father in heaven, what happens to a lot of these women is, again, they fall for this con of living together, and they think living together is a good thing. And when I saw that video, again, being presented, I had to shake my head, because the whole idea of living together, I've seen the disaster firsthand. And you've got men still thinking, oh, this is an option. No, it's not an option. It's a workaround that doesn't work. Similar to men sitting there talking about they want to get passports to go get foreign women, when in actuality, he's sitting there, he's talking about, oh, these women are bad, when the actual problem is that many of these men are not in a position to lead. And they sit there, as they have no understanding of how to be a leader, sitting up there getting upset over Sharkeisha and Shanae and their bad attitudes, instead of saying, look, that pool of women basically is not one I want to deal with, because this woman doesn't want to follow my lead. And the whole thing is, I need to go out here and work on myself in being a leader, because it's not about you chasing women, because that's the mistake that guys with the passports make, is thinking they got to go and from one country to another to chase women, instead of establishing themselves as leaders. Because a man has to be a leader as related to his life. God made you to be a head, he made you to be a steward. And again, stewards understand their responsibility to God. Stewards understand they are responsible to God, and they understand their role is to go out here, and if they get involved with women, they, one, need to be established as related to their faith in God. Two, they need to be established as related to themselves, as related to their whole standard, as related to their moral position, as related to their values, as related to the structure that they're going to establish, as related to their program. Because as related to men who are God-centered, we have a focus on our program and what woman wants to be a part of that program. And three, as we're out here, as we're getting ourselves together and focusing on our purpose, we're not, again, looking to chase women, but if women come in our path and they want to follow our lead, these are the women we go out here and make wives and elevate to an esteemed position by giving them the title of wife. That is what a man does. And again, that's what a man does, because he doesn't do workarounds, because God does not accept workarounds. No, you either follow his standard or you don't. You either follow his standard or you don't. And that's what most men understand as related to life. That again, you either live by God's word or you don't live at all. And if you decide not to live by God's word, these are the consequences you have to deal with. And an entire generation of rebellious and stiff-necked people basically created all the consequences many of us have to deal with from Gen X onward. Many of those boomers and silent generation folks, basically, again, they wanted to rebel during the sexual revolution. They wanted to go out here and create their own standard. And as they created their own standard, we see that they basically, again, reap what they sowed. And what I see is, again, another generation being misled and headed down that road, again, that I saw basically destroy the lives of many of the silent generation, many of the baby boomers, many Gen Xers, and many people onward. Again, being told, oh, living together is an option. No, it's an option that is not beneficial to both men or women, because it's not beneficial to men because you're not going to be able to take the lead if you're coming soft like that. No, you're not going to be able to establish your household and establish order if you don't set a standard from the beginning. And you're not going to be able to have a woman who respects you because you basically settled for less as you went to put the box on layaway, because you were thinking about what's between her legs and not what's between her ears. And when it comes down to the woman, you're basically, again, losing the best years of your life living with a man who is not committed, not living with a man who is not looking to seriously commit to you and dedicate himself to you. Because when you hear a guy talking about, oh, I got to figure out what I want to do, he's not ready for no serious relationship. No, he's not ready for nothing. He may have a job here or there, but the whole thing is he's not committed to anything. So that's not a guy you want to deal with, because he's not in a place where he can lead the relationship. He's not in a place where he can establish structure or order as related to things. And that's not going to make you feel secure. It's going to make you feel insecure that this guy is basically, again, he's talking about living with you and not looking to fully commit to you. So I see people out here and they want to buy into this, but this is not a situation you want to buy into. I hear people, they say, oh, well, we don't want to be divorced, but a living together situation is even worse than divorce, because you wind up losing one of the greatest intangibles of life, which is time. You wind up losing time out of your life. You wind up losing time out of your life. You invest years in a person who isn't committed to you, and then you got to start all over if they decide to break up with you, and you're stuck with kids from this dude in some cases, because I've seen some women, they will live with a guy for 10, 15 years, and they stuck with kids, and it's a nightmare all around. And it's just better for you to go out here and, again, as I see it, stay single until you're ready to be married, because marriage is an institution of God. It's an institution established by God as related to his order, and those who are married have committed no transgression as related to God. So it's better for a man and woman to just be married and just be married in a marriage than to be out here in one of these relationships where things ain't really gonna work out, because a living together situation is one where both partners are not committed to each other. And since they're not committed to each other, there's only one way this relationship can go, and that is into a decline where things break up, because they were never solidly together. Because if people were solidly together, they would look to commit to each other inside of a marriage. Now, if you want to learn why we got caught up in this whole living together proposal by a generation of cowards, you can pick up my books, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single and The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find Why 70% of Black Women Are Single and The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make more videos taking ridiculous instant ideas like living together to the barbecue, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA, from the Black Boule, in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteemed Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed, all-new Esteemed series adventure. Pick up your copy of Esteemed Season of the Witch Girl in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today.
Now available for the first time in paperback, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. Learn all the reasons why so many Black women can't find a husband and why 70% of Black women are single. Get your copy of Why 70% of Black Women Are Single on Amazon.com today.
Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.